If you ever pass over a crossroads, this story might make you stop and think about what or who lies beneath you. It's 1880, and young Mary was raking out the fire and getting it ready for when her master, Dr. Ogden, came home. She wearily stood up, picked up the ash bin, and dusted down her apron. She walked briskly to the kitchen at the back of the house, closing the solid wooden doors behind her as she went. She placed a hand on her stomach. She had butterflies. She had arranged to meet her sweetheart after work, and she had life-changing news to share with him. She was so happy. She did her work throughout the day, and later that evening raced from Dr. Ogden's household to meet her love. She met the young man, just as light began to fade. They embraced, and she pulled away smiling, still holding on to his hands. She stared into his eyes, and told him she was with child, his child. But despite promising she was his love, and that he had vowed to marry her and they would make a life together, he refused to accept that she was carrying his child, and said if she told anyone that it was his, he would deny it, and she would never see him again. Mary pleaded with her lover, but he left her there, sobbing in the street. Mary, heartbroken, made her way back to Dr. Ogden's household, where she lived and worked. The next day, she refused to leave her bed. Fearing she was sick, another maid informed the doctor, who went to check on her. On finding that there was nothing wrong, he reminded her that if she didn't work, she would lose her position and be out on the street. The next day, while the doctor was out, Mary was preparing the fire in his study. She went over to his large wooden desk and picked up a small key. She unlocked and pulled open a long, shallow drawer on the right side of the desk. She pulled out a small glass bottle and slipped it into the pocket of her dress. Quickly, she shut the drawer and locked it and replaced the key. She hurriedly left the room. That night, the house was awoken by Mary screaming in agony. The doctor raced to her, but there was nothing that could be done. By morning, young Mary was dead. At the following inquest, it was found that she had been with child and had been abandoned by her lover on discovering the pregnancy, and in her despair, she used poison to take her own life. A verdict of death whilst her mind was unbalanced was given, and her body was ordered to be buried in a public highway, an unhallowed ground, at a spot where the holy sign of the cross, formed by the crossroads, would debar her soul from walking the earth. The unfortunate young lady's body was taken in the dead of night to the crossroads of Oldham Road and Old Street. There, a grave was dug, and a stake was hammered into her body, straight through her heart. Her body was then buried at the roadside in an unmarked grave. She lay among many others, and her name and life forgotten. Well, that'll about do it, but to let you know, again like other stories, I have had to name the young woman, as unfortunately her name and life have been forgotten. Also, I feel some facts of the time are important to note before you pass judgment. If Mary or any young woman had kept a baby conceived and born out of wedlock, they would have been unlikely to have been able to provide for her on their wage, especially under what became known as the Bastardly Act of the 1834 Poor Law, which deemed that all illegitimate children would be under the sole responsibility of the mother. Furthermore, if the child wasn't taken from the mother immediately after birth, Poor unmarried mothers often had no choice but to attend the workhouse, and were shamed and shunned for having a child out of wedlock. A law passed by King Athelstan in the 10th century prevented burials of suicides on consecrated ground, which remained in force for about 900 years. In Great Britain, there existed a tradition of burying criminals and suicides at the crossroads. This may have been due to the crossroads marking the boundaries of the settlement, coupled with a desire to bury those who were outside the law, outside the settlement, or that the many roads would confuse the dead if they came back. Crossroads were also commonly used as a place of criminal punishment and execution, either by gibbet or hanging tree, which may have also been the reason for it being the site of suicidal burial, as suicide was considered a crime and a mortal sin for many years. But even then, the new Act in 1823 stated that burials of suicides could only take place at night and buried at the roadside without any Christian service. This barbaric law stood for almost 60 years until 1882, when such burials could take place in daylight hours. In the Georgian era in Ashton Under Lynne, the unfortunate people that committed suicide were staked through the heart and buried at the crossroads of Oldham Road and Old Street. The local population believed that by burying people in this way, it would prevent their restless spirits from returning to their bodies. The stake through the heart would prevent the spirit from reanimating the body and returning to do harm to those who buried them. Additionally, the crossroad burial at the roadside also meant that if the spirit did rise, the essence would become confused and would be unable to find its way home. This superstition is traceable right back to early Christianity in England, when those trying to convert the local population incorporated pagan rituals into their teaching, thus reaffirming superstitions associated with All Hallows Eve, Samhain and other pagan festivals, making people fearful of vengeful spirits. The barbaric practice of burying suicides at crossroads was condemned in Parliament in 1822, after the Foreign Secretary, Viscount Castlereagh, committed suicide but was buried in Westminster Abbey. Also, interestingly, in 1774, James Hill, landlord of the Red Lion in Droylsden, was found hanging from a tree. It was presumed he had committed suicide. He was buried at Four Lanes End near Newton Moor on the 21st of May, about 3 a.m. in the morning on the 5th of June. Some of his Droylsden friends dug him up and interred him into the Ashton Parish Church. On the 16th of June, they were compelled to dig him up again and reinter his body on the Newton Moor. In time, evidence arose that James Hill had actually been murdered, and he was dug up a final time and reburied at the church ground. Well, thank you for listening. I appreciate your support, but do let me know your thoughts about this story and poor Mary in the comments below. Also, let me know what your thoughts are on these backwards laws. That will about do it. Take care.